If you see that, you will be in video because we're doing it online.
Okay.
And then you will be also available to read.
I didn't realize he was doing it online. So, okay, that's good. Okay.
But it's, often people forget about it and
Yeah.
start walking around. Our viewers
I'll sit down here.
are used to it.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll do that for question and answers, I guess. Yeah.
Gracias. Okay, I think we will be starting. Welcome everybody, and on behalf of the Graduate School of Urbanism, I'm very happy to see you here today in our regular Wednesday lectures. And I'm glad to present today's speaker, Mr. Stevena Rozы. Not only because Mr. Rozы is a well-acknowledged expert in energy management and urban sustainability, has a lot of experience to share with us, not only because of that, but also because it's the second time that Stephen is coming to give a lecture at this premises with the Graduate School of Urbanism. And we're very happy that this first lecture, which happened in April, was a start, and we're now continuing our cooperation, and hopefully there'll be many more. We're always very happy when our friends come back, and especially when they come back from as far away as Stephen, in the periods like this, which are not particularly favourable to international cooperation. So we're extremely grateful for that, and grateful to the Cultural Division of the American Embassy for making this visit possible. Welcome once again, and here's to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I am very happy to be here today, and certainly honored. I was saying earlier that if I was living in Moscow, I'd spend a lot of time hanging out here. It just seems like a really fun place to to visit with friends, learn, and get to spend some time on the internet. I'm here today to talk about one of my favorite subjects. It has to do with energy and environmental solutions for urban areas. And I'm going to talk about some key concepts associated with urbanism and some trends that seem to be happening and some new things that seem to be happening out there in the real world that perhaps maybe you're not familiar with, and maybe you'll learn a little bit about um, some of the things that I've experienced, and hopefully by sharing my experiences and my perception of sustainable development, you might be able to perhaps have a different twist on it. So I'm going to be talking about sustainable development, certainly how it applies to cities. I'll be talking about planning solutions, a little bit about transportation, and also about sustainable buildings. This is where I come from. I live in a place called Louisville, Kentucky. It's a population of about 1 million people. It's in the central part of the United States. We're known for such things as automobile manufacturing, horse racing, and bourbon. We make a lot of bourbon in Kentucky. I also have a house in New Hampshire, a small little town of about 22,000 that I split my time between those two locations, and also I serve as director for a not-for-profit organization that happens to be headquartered in Atlanta. So I spend some time in Atlanta as well. So I want to talk about this whole concept of sustainability and coach it in the terms of programs, policies, and technologies. Most environmental impacts that we see today happen to have a focus that is both typically local and regional, but some of these activities that occur based on environmental policies and programs tend to not only just have local and regional focus, but they also have national and international implications. It's my belief, and I'd really like you to take away this one thought if you don't take away anything else tonight, that when policies, programs, and technologies all tend to work together and coalesce at a certain time in a certain place, magical things start to happen. And by what I mean by that, policies are essentially strategies and goals that are developed by governmental and management structures. Programs are those activities and incentives that are developed to essentially achieve the goals of those policies. And technologies are the means of implementing the programs. They include the software, the hardware, the human resource potential, the types of support that's given to create an actual on-the-ground deliverable solution. When we talk about sustainable development can be defined in any one of a number of ways. In fact, as an academic, I've found 48 different definitions of sustainable development. When you take these two terms, the idea of sustainability or sustainable, and you try to define it in your own terms, we find that everybody can have a little bit of a different perception as to what that might mean. The same holds true for the idea of development. Development isn't always about developing a site. It can also be about developing a program or even developing the approaches to how you might manage a not-for-profit organization. So even development is a multi-terminal kind of word. And then we take these two words that seem to be relatively undefinable and a little touchy-feely, and then we combine them into this concept called sustainable development. And we really have a difficult time sometimes understanding what it is, what's sustainable and what's not sustainable. But in modern terms, the origins of the phrase sustainable development come from the Brundtland Report for the World Commission on Environment and Development. It defines sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So sustainability talks about economics, it talks about resources, it talks about social aspects and social conditions, but it also has this key concept of intergenerational equity, meaning what sort of world are we going to hand down to our children and our children's children? What sort of resources are they going to have? Do they have the same rights to resources in the future that we have today? And how are we going to rationalize any kind of the resource allocations we have in the world today, and what are we going to hand down to our children? There is a relationship between energy and sustainable development, and this is what I've spent most of my life working on in different ways. So I've attacked it from different means. But energy is essentially at the heart of some of the principal environmental problems we face. When we think about energy and how we use energy and the patterns of our energy use, a lot of those happen to create environmental problems. We see this especially with fossil fuels. Certainly the unprecedented economic growth that has occurred in the last 100 years has been primarily due to the fact that we've had low-cost energy, and it's primarily happened in countries that have been industrialized. So there's this link between access to energy and industrialization, and we've kind of gotten to the point where we've been enabled our economies because energy costs have been low. And certainly oil is no longer $1 a barrel anymore. When we think of low-cost energy, in fact, we usually don't think of fossil fuels. Where I come from in Kentucky, we have a joke that coal is cheaper than dirt. And if you actually look at the numbers, that's true. If I want to buy a ton of coal, I can have it delivered to my house for $110 a ton. But if I want to buy a ton of topsoil and have it delivered to my house, it's $150 a ton. So coal is literally cheaper than dirt, and we find that in the world of sustainable development, we have this upside-down economics that seems to slap us in the face every once in a while. So when we think of low-cost energy today, we're not thinking about fossil fuels. We're looking for other resources that are even less expensive. And also, when we talk about sustainable development, we're really talking about a family of problems, a family of issues that have arisen that all seem to coalesce under this category concept, this fundamental principle that we call sustainable development. We could call it an overarching principle for policy design. I'll show a few examples. Population growth is certainly an issue. We continue to grow our populations worldwide. In fact, we're going to add another 1 billion people in the next 12 years. 1 billion people are going to be added to the planet in the next 12 years. And yet we have populations today that we haven't really been able to provide clean water and access to energy. In fact, there's 1.25 billion people on the planet that don't have enough energy to light a light bulb. Now, how are we going to bring them into our century, and how are they going to have electronic devices? How are they going to have an educational system without access to those resources? Urban development has become an issue because we have different patterns of urban development. We tend to, some cities build up, some cities increase their size by acquisition of additional territory. And yet we see in some countries, like China is going to have to add by 2030, 400 cities with equivalent populations of 1 million people. And that has to do not only with their population growth, but also the fact that people are still moving from the countryside into the cities in China. And then we have energy use, and we've created a lot of environmental issues that are associated with energy use. As far as cities go, we're experiencing urban dislocation. We have changes in physical infrastructure and also changes in the requirements of what we build. There's different demands for personal space. We desire more comfortable environments now, and all that requires more energy as part of that process. And sometimes the growth becomes a little unmanageable. This is Las Vegas. Anybody heard of Las Vegas? No? A couple people? Yeah. Well, it's an interesting city because Las Vegas was a quintessential hydropower city in the United States. The reason it was built was because we were able to construct a large hydroelectric power dam just outside of town. It enabled a lot of commercialization and industrialization to occur in the basin. And yet when it began to develop, beginning about the 1970s, within 20 years we built out this entire basin. And from an urban land use perspective, all of a sudden our demands on the physical space that was really available to build the city were outmatched what we could actually supply there. So they're constantly building taller buildings, they're tearing things down, they need more water. Las Vegas is built in the desert, by the way. It uses a lot of water. It requires air conditioning in order to sustain habitable environments. So when we think about environmental issues, and particularly with fossil fuels, we have issues with pollution of water, pollution of soil, air contamination that's associated with our combustion processes we use for fossil fuels. When I talk about fossil fuels, I'm talking about the whole category of coal, oil, natural gas, and a couple others. And yet we have other environmental problems that are associated with this pattern of energy use. We have mercury concentrations that increase in soils and in streams. We have lead concentrations appear in the atmosphere and in soils. And then we have greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases are heat-trapping gases. And what we see is that from a worldwide perspective, our greenhouse gas emissions are increasing. Greenhouse gas emissions are linked to energy, and specifically they're linked to our combustion of fossil fuels. And this is a worldwide phenomena. As countries begin to industrialize and urbanize to a greater extent, we see concentrated issues associated with the environmental impacts of our combustion of fossil fuels. In China, for example, Beijing, the air is practically unbreathable there. In fact, when they decided to have the Olympics, they closed up the city for 2 months and gave everybody a voucher to take a vacation out of town, so they could cut their industries, turn their industries off, and shut them down so the air would clean up for the Olympics. I mean, is that any way to manage a city? I don't know. Probably not. So how do we solve this problem? The way we typically mitigate environmental issues, especially environmental emissions, has to do with something called stabilization triangle theory. Anybody heard of stabilization triangle theory? Yeah, a couple people. See, but it's probably the most used theory in environmental mitigation, but very few people really have heard about it. But the idea is that we do a baseline analysis of what emissions happen to be, and we look at it from a historical perspective. We do a measurement and verification process to look backwards and find out what sort of emissions have occurred. And then we create a trajectory that, hey, if we don't do anything, this is what our path is going to look like. So the way we're going to fix this is we're going to say, okay, no more emissions. We're going to flat path these emissions. But we have to do this in the face of some problems. One, increasing energy use. The world needs more energy. The patterns of energy use are going to change. And yet we want to reduce our emissions. And how are we going to do this? Well, we have a few tools in our toolkit. We have energy conservation, energy efficiency. We have fuel switching. We can swap out fossil fuels for renewable fuels. We can use less. We can change our transportation systems. There's a lot that we can do if we choose to. Very quickly, from an urban perspective, I just want to give you an idea of how we look at urban governments when we analyze them and how we come up with assessments based on energy. I did a study for 25 cities in what we call the Sun Belt, southern part of the United States. We used 10 qualitative variables that include variables such as energy indicators, local policy indicators, organizational memberships, and environmental indicators. And when you do qualitative analysis, you're just looking for a policy or program that exists in real time. Do they have, for example, sustainable development identified as a written policy or goal? Yes or no? That's a qualitative variable. And when you look at the types of variables and try to tabulate them, you can look at each one of your members of your study group. In this case, we have cities. We can find out what kind of programs they have and who sponsors them. We can also rank these qualitative variables by what's called rates of participation. In this case, it's rates of partition of policies, or to what extent are these policies used. And as my example, sustainable development being a policy goal, at the time this study was undertaken, 52% of these cities had sustainable development as a policy goal. But that's just one example of one of 10 variables. You can also rank these types of variables by just the number of policies that have been specifically adopted by any one of the members of your study. In this case, Los Angeles and San Diego, they're right up there on the sustainable policies. They've adopted all of them that we looked at in this study. However, there's other cities in the study that, well, they're just not really on board with sustainable development. Maybe they're out to lunch, or maybe they're just doing something else. Regardless, sustainable development isn't on their radar screen from a municipal policy perspective. We can also look at quantitative variables, which means we're just looking at numbers that might be associated with sustainability. In this case, we looked at energy indicators, transportation indicators, environmental indicators, and demographic indicators. And what we found using quantitative variables, which we can throw up onto a spreadsheet very easily. We found that some cities use more energy than others. Some have higher energy costs per capita. Some have more residences that use alternative fuels. Some use alternative transportation more often than others. And one of the first findings we had in this was that if you want to make policy in cities, you don't want to look at energy costs. The politician comes and says, hey, we're going to keep energy costs down. I don't know, y'all ever hear that? Maybe it's just in my country. Okay. But at any rate, we're going to keep energy costs down. Well, that's not a good idea because local governmental actions do not influence energy costs. So if local policies want to be effective, they have to do something else. And then it begs the question, what else can they do? Well, there are things that they can do. They can focus on transportation sector. And if they look at alternative transportation, travel time to work, population density, and household vehicles, and try to control these variables, those policies can be very effective. They can also be very effective in the residential sector, and they can do that by looking at alternative heating systems for their residences, reducing the number of single-family households, and working on the urban heat island effect. The best mix of policies when you run iterative regressions is alternative transportation, population density, alternative heating, household vehicles, and then unhealthy days. And such is the case of Beijing. If you have an urban government, you try to keep your pollution down, you try to keep the skies clean so people don't have to shut their factories down, we find that the cities do a whole lot better. You can rank cities by putting together a matrix that incorporates both the quantitative variables and the qualitative variables, and when you do this, that enables you to do a two-group comparison, meaning that you can look at the cities that you consider to be more sustainable and compare them to the cities that you feel like are not as sustainable. If you look at our more sustainable cities, they're adopting a higher number of policies, they have higher populations, higher population densities, they use alternative transportation more often, and they have relatively low energy use. On the other hand, if we look at our less sustainable cities, we find that they're not adopting any policies associated with sustainable development. They have lower populations, lower population density. They're not using alternative transportation systems, and they have higher energy use. So it sort of proves that there are some things we can do when we are working with cities. And the categories of things that we can do is we can focus on policies and programs that are related to residential and transportation energy use. We can try to influence the demand for energy. We can use creative planning to try to change population densities. We can expand our programs to promote energy efficiency and energy conservation and improve mass transit. Strategies, we can implement more creative planning approaches. We can design transportation systems that are less dependent on automobiles or change the automobiles themselves. Provide incentives to walk, bicycle, or take public transportation. Well, we can build vehicles that use alternative fuels or offer incentives to use alternative transportation systems. From a planning perspective, we can use what's called green belts. Green belts are urban areas that sort of design the growth and focus it to include parks and forests around the perimeter of the building. The perimeter of the city and the buildings within them. We can do green wedges. Green wedge is essentially a park that is very narrow at the city center and gets very wide out there in the perimeter of the city. And so it creates a corridor or an avenue whereby people can walk or bicycle or come from the far reaches of the city down toward the center. And we can do this by we can create an incentive for doing this by relocating urban amenities within the urban service area and also trying to focus them in certain locations. We can densify, essentially provide incentives for cities to grow more densely. We can provide disincentives for suburbanization, and we can also encourage brownfield redevelopment. And that's a process whereby we take abandoned industrial sites that are in the urban core or maybe in the first suburban ring, and we modernize them and adapt them to a different kind of use. We can do a lot of bicycling. How many of you bicycle? You got a bicycle? No? A couple of people? Yeah, I do a lot of bicycling. I've actually put about 3,500 kilometers on my bicycle this summer. So I enjoy bicycling, and it's supposed to keep me fit, but I haven't been losing enough weight, and I can't figure that part out yet. But anyway, we can change our cities and put more means and safer ways to bicycle which can be a lot of fun. We can. I think it's interesting. You go to Amsterdam. How many people have been to Amsterdam? Anybody been to Amsterdam? Been to the train station? Yeah, it's easy to get to that train station. You can take a canal boat, you can take a river boat, you can take a tram, you can take a train. You can take a taxi or a car, but if you have a car, you can only drop somebody off. You can't park your car there, right? They won't let you park your cars there. But if you decide you want a bicycle, they've got a 3-story bicycle garage sitting there, so you can park your bicycle there. Now, is that an incentive to bicycle to the train station? I think it's pretty cool. You know, that's a fun thing to do. We can also regionalize our transportation systems, which helps focus. Just in the case of Amsterdam, which is one of the better examples of a means to do that. We can also change our vehicles. We can use hydrogen gas vehicles if we want, rather than vehicles that use fossil fuel. We can use hybrid electric vehicles, or perhaps electric vehicles that essentially help keep the air clean. In fact, in my town, we have about 10 electric buses, for example, that are charged by induction. We can use natural gas vehicles because you can substitute natural gas for fuel oil, and from a carbon balance point of view, you're putting causing less environmental damage as part of the process. This is one of the projects one of my companies did. We have a problem with sanitation because of garbage trucks, and garbage trucks pick up the garbage and they run on diesel fuel, which of course emits pollutants, and also in that process it puts a lot of soot in the air as well. That's a byproduct of the combustion of diesel fuel. There's also an issue with landfill gas, because landfill gas, if it's not combusted and goes into the atmosphere, it behaves like methane, and then it becomes a greenhouse gas. So what we did is we drilled wells into the landfill, about 80 of them. We take that landfill gas out of the landfill. We use that was supposed to have been a pointer. We use in this facility, we clean up that gas. We can pull our garbage trucks up to the pump, and we fill them up on gas that comes out of the landfill rather than diesel. That's pretty cool, huh? We can change how we design our buildings. In the United States, we use something called the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design that provides a set of standards for buildings. We find that these buildings use less energy, less water, and they salvage a lot of construction waste. This process is based on a check sheet. These check sheets are free. You can get them on the internet, and they provide a whole set of opportunities for you to make a more sustainable building. It looks at the location and transportation systems associated with your building, the types of site conditions, water efficiency, energy and atmosphere, indoor air quality, what kind of materials and resources you use within the building, and whether or not you're designing your building in such a way to have some level of regional priority. Now, this is a U.S.-based model. There's other models out there, and this one's been used in about, I think 60 countries. There's another one called BREEAM that the British developed. Here in Russia, we have about 5 different programs that have been developed in local governments. St. Petersburg probably has the most successful one. They have 27 green buildings under their green building program. But regardless, the LEED program, interestingly enough, I found out that here in Russia we have 112 LEED certified buildings that went through this process. I don't think you have to go through the process like this to be certified a green building, but it certainly does help to try to focus some of your attention on some of the issues associated with sustainability as you go through the design process. We can look at renewables. Renewable energy is kind of fun because they're carbon neutral. They don't put greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. They're very abundant. They're underutilized. They're a low-cost fuel. They enable you to provide decentralized energy to your facilities, and they certainly create a lot of new employment. Regrettably, they do have higher cost. They have a local regional focus, meaning wind might work really great here, but maybe solar doesn't work so good. And they will require some new infrastructure. This is one of my projects at Union College in my state of Kentucky, where we had 2 natural gas boilers, and we got rid of them. We put underground geothermal heat pump systems in. We had 4 college dormitories in this project, and we gave each individual student individual control over the temperature in their room. And the way they control the temperature in the room is they get on their little phone, they get on their website, they punch in their room number and their access code, and they're able to vary the temperature in their building. Now you say, Steve, now if you give students all this power, they're probably going to use a lot of energy, aren't they? Well, the answer is no. I mean, they get on there and they get excited about the program. They want to be comfortable. It enables them to be comfortable. And if they leave for the weekend or if they go for a break, they can shut their system down. And they can do, if they leave and they're on their, their parents pick them up from college and they're on their way from school and they forgot to turn it down, they can do it from the car. So they're able to control the temperature in their room, and it saves a whole lot of energy in the process. These systems, if you put geothermal heating systems in, you're essentially drilling, one methodology is to drill wells, and you run water down into these wells, and then you pump that water through piping, and you take it into an individual heating and cooling unit. So it makes a big mess. If you've got a college professor who in a college administration that doesn't want a bunch of holes in the ground when it comes time for all the people that are donating to the college to stop in, you got to puts a lot of pressure on people like me to clean this up before we have visitors come on site, because it does make a big mess and can be a little costly. This is another school. This is a middle school in Kentucky. What happened here is they put solar PV panels on the roof for electricity. They have electric hot water heating. They have a lot of natural daylighting in the building itself. Geothermal heat pumps have been designed. They have a rainwater collection system. They collect rainwater off the roof. They use it in toilets and also in housekeeping and in janitorial services, and also in urinals. It's used for everything except domestic water purposes. If you're a middle school student, you go into the lobby, there's a touch screen there. And you can touch each one of these little buttons, if you want to call them that, and it'll show you a graphic depiction of that system. If you want to see how much energy the solar PV system is generating, the middle schooler can go up and punch that display, and he can find out exactly what's going on with it. And in fact, if you take a tour of this school, a middle school student will give you a tour of it and explain to you how all these exotic systems work. One of the things I do in the real world is I teach courses in renewable energy and sustainability, and I had one that I taught in South Africa one time, and we picked this hotel as our location for our course. And it was the first LEED Platinum building on the continent of Africa. It's a building that has a lot of insulation. It has triple glazed windows. It uses the mass of the building to shade from the summer sun. It has a tensegrity structure to essentially shade some of the entrances. Collects rainwater off the roof that's used within the building. The restaurant there grows its own vegetables for salads and tomatoes and anything. Some of the foodstuffs are picked in the morning and they're used in the restaurant that day. There's solar PV or photovoltaic panels on the roof, and then there's also on the north side of the building. Of course, if you're in the southern hemisphere, everything's predominantly north, or at least the sun is, and so they have shading devices, but these are all solar panels as well that generate electricity for the building itself. I have 3 wind turbine generators generate electricity for use in the building. These are geothermal heat pump storage tanks. If you were to get picked up at the airport and they were going to take you to the hotel, they have an electric vehicle that they drive over there that is charged. The energy all comes from their solar panels. Their maintenance equipment looks like this, so it's also charged on site. If you're in the exercise room and you're exercising with one of the bicycles, these bicycles are hooked up to devices that allow that circular motion to be turned into electricity, and it charges the lighting system for the room. This is another such building. It was designed to use 70% less energy and projected to meet 110% of the building's energy needs. This one has also been certified as a carbon neutral building, meaning that when you do the carbon analysis on the building, we find that the energies that go into the building are completely offset by the renewable energy in the building and by sequestration, which is a process essentially storing carbon. In this case, it's forestry storage. All this is kind of fun, but usually when we have buildings, they need energy, and we have to pay an energy bill. Wouldn't it be nice if we had buildings that generated more energy than they needed? That'd be kind of cool, wouldn't it? Well, this is one such building. This is a middle school that has solar power, has geothermal heating and air conditioning, a lot of natural lighting systems, and a lot of other features tied into it. But instead of paying a utility bill every month, for 10 months out of the year, they get a check from the utility. That's pretty cool. That's an interesting business model for a school. Instead of energy becoming an expense, they now get paid for producing extra energy. And it also provides a great educational program for the children. So children learn a lot of environmental concepts associated with that. And these are called net zero energy schools or zero net energy schools. We also see this whole concept being applied today in commercial buildings as well. But this is a new field of endeavor. The first of these buildings just started appearing about 10 years ago. This is a community college building, a health and sciences building, which is qualified as a zero net energy building. It uses solar PV and geothermal heat pumps for renewable energy generation. It was built in 2011. It's actually one of the world's largest completed zero net energy buildings. This is one in Malaysia, an office building. This is one of the first zero net energy office buildings that I could find. It was built in 2007. They don't have to be all that expensive. A $6 million building, and they got a fairly substantial office building as part of that process. We're also seeing building integrated photovoltaics or building integrated solar stuff that generates electricity. In this case, we use solar generating materials that are integrated into the exterior building shell to generate on-site electricity. This is typically on the roof and on the walls or in the glass or glazing associated with the building. This is what some of these look like. So all these begin to add up to a new type of urban environment where we begin to rethink what a city might be. You know, maybe the city is one in which the buildings start to be more responsible. They generate more of their own power on site. We can take solar panels and install them in roofs. We can change the glazing so that the glazing itself essentially generates electricity. We can build canopies around the building and put photoelectric panels on them. All this creates a whole new set of opportunities on what a future community might begin to look like. It might begin to look like one in which we're not so dependent on fossil fuels. That's actually the end of my presentation. I did want to talk about one last thing. I mean, a lot of times I get questioned about, well, all that's really nice in the United States, but we can't do that over here for this reason or that reason. But this was just yesterday? No, yeah, yesterday. I've only been it's my third trip to the country. I've been here for 10 days, but I keep moving around a lot, so I'm having I can't remember where I am, but this was a gymnasium that I found in Perm yesterday, and they have two different types of solar panels. They have what are called evacuated tube collectors, and these are used to heat the gymnasium and heat the water in the gymnasium, and they have solar PV panels on the roof to generate power. You can see it's not a small building; it's a fairly substantial gymnasium, and this is the proud engineer of our project. Who showed me how the equipment worked, and this particular company has just finished building a second gym that's based on the same principles. I've written a couple books about it. One's the Sustainable Development Handbook. So if you ever hear the term sustainable development, you can say, "Hey, I know the guy who wrote the book about it." You know, that's me. Carbon reduction. I also wrote a book about carbon reduction. It kind of looks at how we can begin to change the built environment in such a way that we aren't as dependent on fossil fuels. Okay, I was asked to finish in 45 minutes, and I'm 2 minutes short. How's that? And we have plenty of time for questions if anybody wants to ask questions. Or maybe everybody's just really hungry and wants to go eat. You know, who knows? When you think about it, it really is about policies, programs, and technologies. When we get all the stars that align, all kinds of things can happen. If there's policies in place to help promote something, if we have programs in place to help build groundwork to make things happen, and if we have the technologies in place, then we begin to see the world in a different way, and we begin to see that there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of potential out there. There's a lot of opportunity to do things a little differently than we have in the past, and maybe it's just a matter of re-engineering our approach to sciences and approach to technologies. I think here in Russia, you guys are really blessed. I mean, you've got some great engineers, some great architects, and some wonderful mathematicians. So there's bound to be a way to figure out something that's really workable here. I'm not sure what that is, but I see a lot of hope here. And I don't think the future really is all about fossil fuels. I think we're about to the point where we're going to start looking at other alternatives. And one of the big drivers is our efforts to provide a better environment and a more sustainable environment for our children and our children's children.
Ask your question, please. Can you repeat, please, how do you define sustainable development for the city?
I'm sorry?
How do you define the sustainable development for the city?
How do I define sustainable development for a city?
Yes.
Cities do that on their own, and they do it in policy statements. There are cities in the United States that have, sustainable development that is written right into their mission and core vision statements for the urban government. Some cities put it in language as part of their planning department. How I define it is not that important. What's important is how one particular city defines it and how they choose to address it. The city of Navarra, Spain, for example, defines sustainable development in terms of parkland and energy. Those are the two primary focuses. So they tried to develop more parkland and green space within their city, and they had their city. It was a small town. Their electrical system was based on two large coal-fired power plants. They made a lot of pollution, and they were going to have to meet new pollution regulations and change their power plants, and so they decided to try to do something else. And what they did instead is they started developing their wind power resources to a great extent, and then their solar resources as a secondary resource. And within 20 years, they were able to shut down both their coal-fired power plants, and within 30 years, they were generating 50% more energy than they needed, and they sell that to France now as for income. So that city defines sustainability based on parkland and energy. Some cities will actually hire a sustainable development coordinator or sustainable development director, and that's a new field, actually. 20 years ago in the U.S., we didn't have anybody there was no job title like that. Now there is. And each one of these cities will develop a small department within their urban government that'll manage the process for them. Most cities, to answer your question more directly, most cities try to go to some standard reference as to what sustainable development is, but most of them are based on some permutation of this concept, that it's development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So this is sort of the root principle associated with it. Some urban governments focus more on the social aspects of sustainability. Others focus more on the economic aspects. Others on the resource aspects. Some focus more on the health and services and safety aspects of it. But usually there's a platform of policies that you're going to find that are developed for that particular governmental entity.
Is there any governmental obligation to follow this?
Is there what?
Is there any governmental obligation to follow these lines, for example, to sustain renewable energy, to reduce traffic fuels, and so on?
Usually not at the local governmental entity. It's hard to mandate that an urban government only use renewable energy. There are a few examples. Santa Monica, California made a mandate that they would get 100% of their energy from renewable energy. It took them 30 years, but they did it. Occasionally you see a mandate at the local governmental entity. That's pretty rare. Usually it's a mix of mandates. There are mandates associated with buildings. For example, some utilities have requirements that a proportion of their energy has to be renewable, and then they will offer incentives for buildings, and then some local governments will mandate those incentives. So then say, okay, you're going to do something associated with renewables, or you're going to reduce your energy use substantially, either compared to baseline for new construction or compared to actual previous consumption for existing. So it varies. There's a lot of color and a lot of flavor across cities. And that's the answer for my country. I don't know the answer for yours. You guys have to sort that out.
Yeah, but still,
Excuse me, do you think natural gas is a sustainable option for cars?
A sustainable option for what?
For cars, natural gas.
For cars, natural gas? Well, yeah. You can have compressed natural gas vehicles. And you can have compressed natural gas buses and trucks. You can buy them ready-made off the factory floor to run on compressed natural gas. In fact, a lot of natural gas utilities around the world have a fleet of vehicles that are all natural gas. Now keep in mind, natural gas still emits about 60% as much carbon as diesel fuel or oil, but it's a huge reduction going to natural gas compared to diesel fuel or gasoline, for example. So there's a big drive to do just that, especially in places where there's excess natural gas.
Okay, and for example, so you think so that tax is better to be hiked in other fossil fuels than natural gas? Tax are better in fossil fuels. What do you think is the best option to reduce the fossil fuels used in cars?
Okay, if I'm hearing you right, you're asking, is there any kind of directive to reduce natural gas usage in cars?
Or fossil fuels?
Of diesel fuel or gasoline in cars. In my country, there is what's called a fleet consumption standard, and every year up through 2030, the automobile manufacturers have to produce automobiles that use a little bit less gasoline, so that by 2030, I think the average fleet mileage, well, we use miles over there. You don't have to think about miles, thankfully, but we're going to pretend like miles or kilometers just for fun. But it's about 48, it's supposed to increase the efficiency of vehicles to 48 miles per gallon, which is about 12 miles per liter, roughly.
Okay, but actually happened that because I read about the case of BMW or Renault that they didn't do really reduce the emissions of the cars.
Yeah, you can get substantial reductions in vehicles if you can find a market where people will buy them. And also, in some countries, they actually have mandates to require you to do that. An interesting governmental mandate in Brazil, for example, has to do with ethanol. They make ethanol for vehicles, and they started in 1984, I think it was. They passed a law. In 1984, all their vehicles ran on gasoline. They passed a law saying that after a certain year, I think it was 1990, after 1990, all vehicles had to be able to run on either 100% ethanol or 100% gasoline. So when you go to a pump station to fill up your car in Brazil, you dial a blend, percentage of ethanol to percentage of gasoline, and you can see the price change as you change that dial, but your vehicle can run on 100% one, 100% of the other. And that's a federal mandate. That's probably one of the more interesting ones. Natural gas, I don't know of any countries that mandate natural gas vehicles. I do know a lot of companies that do it. They say, okay, all our vehicles are going to be natural gas, and they just run natural gas vehicles. So, does that help?
Yes,
That kind of answer your question? Okay, yeah. Who else had a question? Yeah, it was you, okay.
If I got it right, you are full-time Russian.
Me?
Yeah.
No.
No, that's the first one.
No, I'm not even part-time Russian. I live in the U.S.
But still, so you've been to a number of big Russian cities. And, what do you think would be 2 or 3 biggest issues we should change to be more sustainable in cities?
Car was going by. What was he asking me? What's the question?
What would be probably 2 or 3 major things you would change about sustainability?
Here in Russia?
Yeah.
In the next few years, what'll happen here in Russia?
Just let's take Moscow, for example.
I don't know what works in Russia. I got a feeling that here in Russia, if you decide to do it, you could reduce your use of fossil fuels substantially. I think, what if you just had a mandate that said, this is how we started it. We organized new standards for transportation and for buildings. And we said, okay, all buildings that we design and build are going to use 10% less energy than they did before. And then we're going to go back and retrofit all the existing buildings to the extent we can so that they'll use less energy. Maybe here in Russia you just say, hey, we're going to try to reduce energy consumption by 10%. That would have a huge impact. Lower cost, lower greenhouse gases, have a very positive environmental impact. I'm not sure what it would be, but see, that would be a policy statement saying we're not sure how we're going to do it yet, but we're going to try to find a way to do it. And your engineers, architects, and mathematicians will all figure it out. I guarantee you guys know how to do it. So I think that if you think of any country in the world that has a huge amount of resources, it has to be Russia. You've got, and the same holds true for natural renewable resources. You've got lots of waterways, you've got hydroelectric potential, you have a lot of wind potential, solar potential is spotty, you have geothermal potential here. One of the problems we have, one of the things, what creates the pollution is that we take a fossil fuel and we combust it. And why do we combust it? We're combusting it for heat and electricity. Now, the way we do this is we have this thing called a boiler. First off, you start with the tank. Anybody heard of the Rankine cycle? Okay, this is a steam engine. You have a tank. The tank has water in it. You take the water under pressure. You move it to a boiler. The boiler fires it up, and that causes that water to boil. And when it boils, it turns to steam. The steam rises and creates pressure. The pressure hits a turbine. The turbine spins. There's an axis there. It causes a generator to spin, and you generate electricity. Okay, now every one of those power lines, there's 4 lines. Three sets of power and a neutral. And then what happens when that water condenses, when it changed from an atmospheric state from a gaseous state to water, it goes back into the tank, and then the whole process repeats itself. But what keeps this thing going is this boiler, and you're firing this boiler with coal, oil, or natural gas. Now, wouldn't it be nice if you could eliminate the boiler? The reason you're putting pollution in the air is because when you combust that fossil fuel, you have atmospheric gases, sulfur, nitrogen, mercury, a whole combination of heavy metals that all go up into the atmosphere. And if you live next door to one of those things, you get sick, unless it's being cleaned up. But if we could eliminate that, that'd be great. But you got, all over the world we have resources that, like geothermal resources. If you drill a geothermal well, and you hit hot water, it might be 3,000 meters below the ground. But you find hot water there, and that hot water might be 450 degrees Celsius, and it's still liquid. Why is it liquid? At 450, huh?
Pressure.
Pressure. It's under high pressure, right? So you drill a well into that. Now what happens when that hot liquid comes up the pipe and hits the atmosphere? It hits atmospheric pressure. It changes state. It can't stay water anymore because the pressure is now low. So what does it do? It flashes into something called steam. Steam? Were we just talking about steam? All of a sudden that steam hits the turbine, drives the generator, generates electricity, right? We don't have any boiler. What I've just described is a system that can generate renewable energy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you don't have to have a boiler, which means you don't have to maintain the boiler, which means you don't have to trains to truck all the coal to the boiler, which means you don't have to worry about the boiler going down. You have less moving parts, you have less maintenance, you generate electricity. Why aren't we doing that more? There's resources out there. The point of that conversation is that there's resources out there where we could avoid the use of fossil fuels if we wanted to. I'm not saying it's going to solve all of our energy problems. I'm just saying that we just need to be a little more creative and think about where those resources are and how we can go about using them.
Excuse me. A lead is a system of standards of
Lead? You're talking about lead?
A lead
Yeah.
is a system of
standards, maybe? Yeah.
It's
Oh.
a system of ecological standards to the
Okay.
buildings.
LEED is the LEED program, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, is a family of standards. There's one set of standards for new construction, another set of standards for existing buildings, a separate set of standards for hospitals, another one for schools, another one for commercial buildings, another one for community development. It's a whole family of different types of standards. They're all based on the model that we're going to try to build more sustainable construction. And it's usually not a government regulated standard. LEED program was established and developed by a not-for-profit agency. Now, having said that, governments do adopt LEED as its standard for buildings. For example, in my state of Kentucky, all government buildings, new government buildings, have to meet LEED standards. There's other states that adopted that as well. So in those states, the LEED standard has been adopted and is regulated. There's other standards out there that are readily adoptable. There's something called the International Energy Conservation Code for buildings. Anybody ever heard of that? Anybody? Okay. It's established. It's an international code for energy efficient buildings. It is developed by the International Standards Organization that is based in Switzerland, and any country or any locality can adopt it. It's free on the internet, so you can go on the internet and get a copy of it. And it'll give you a basic set of standards on how to design a more energy efficient building. It's in some countries adopt it as their formal standard. In my country, some of the state governments adopt it as a formal standard. But when it's adopted as a formal standard, it becomes part of the building code, if you will, or the building requirements for your buildings. And then it becomes a mandate. But before then, it's just an optional thing. People do it because they want to do it. I was in Hungary one time, and I was keynote speaker at a conference, and I went to talk about sustainable development. It was in 1999, and I didn't know what to talk to the Europeans about, so I had about an hour and 15 minutes to talk with them. I spent 45 minutes talking about sustainable buildings and energy, and then I spent about 30 minutes talking about economics and energy economics and how we in the U.S. spend a lot of time trying to analyze all our decisions and try to justify them based on their economics and prove that they pay back and have good return on investments and all that. And a couple of the Europeans came up after me and they said, we haven't had anybody from the United States come and talk about sustainable development, so we don't really know about what you're saying. But we do know one thing. It seems like a lot of work. to do all that economic stuff. Over here, we just do it because it's the right thing to do. So I think that whenever there's a policy-making decision, it usually happens because somebody or some group in a decision-making capacity in a group of authority has decided we're going to do this because it's the right thing to do. That's usually what happens. Sometimes the economics help, sometimes they don't. Yeah.
When it comes to building the
I'm sorry?
when it comes to building the energy-free buildings, is there any competition between the regular construction firms and those ones who want to build them energetic ones?
Okay, these buildings are designed to be energy efficient, so there is competition, but there's not competition. There's competitive negotiation to deliver the project as designed, not to compare it to something else that might be different. However, in the case of that one middle school that I showed you a picture of, the one that essentially for 10 months out of the year gets checks from the utility, interestingly enough, that building was built at a lower cost than the average school in Kentucky that year. That's rare. Usually buildings of that nature cost about 5 to 10% more. You have a question?
Yeah. Do you know about eco labels for electricity?
Eco labels?
Yeah, for electricity. I mean,
For refrigerators?
Yeah, they have also, they give a point. But I think about like 3 points for if you use eco label for electricity for your buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah,
in the
E, I think it's.
Yeah, in the United States we have something called Energy Star,
yeah.
which is equivalent to eco label, which and it is an eco labeling process, but it is an energy specific one. The Europeans have another program of their own.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I mean, I just bought a new dryer for my house.
It really will work and it's
Yeah.
really will move a lot of.
I get a rebate. It's like, you know, you spend a lot of money on a dryer, you get an extra $75 back because it's energy efficient. Yeah, yeah, we do that too. Yeah, you know, you make a good point. Surprisingly enough, refrigerator design has been advanced substantially in the last 20 years, and new refrigerators all over the world use a whole lot less energy than they did in the past. Another thing that we've done is electric motors. Electric motors are responsible for a huge amount of our electrical consumption, and we found that we can increase efficiencies in electric motors by 6 to 20%. So often there's a good reason to get rid of old electric motors and put in new ones. So there is a big movement to replace equipment. Now, sometimes some of these programs for buildings that look at energy use, in order to meet the energy reduction requirements, they do, especially in new construction, they use a computer program software to do the modeling, and so oftentimes they will look at the appliances, you know, motors, refrigerators, anything that uses energy within the building, and they will buy energy saving equipment so that they can meet their energy reduction requirements. But I think that's a key component of a sustainability program, and in some governmental agencies around the world, governmental entities will provide incentives of some kind for people to replace older equipment. Good program, I think, especially with refrigerators and electric motors. Anybody else have a question? We're losing a few people now. Everybody's getting hungry. Anything else? Okay. Well, you guys have been great. I really have enjoyed having the opportunity to talk with you. I thank you for coming. I appreciate your interest. You really are our hope for the future. So go out there and be sustainable, okay? All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Нет, can I ask you? Can I get your question?
Yes, you have a question?
I'm wondering about electricity high road, and I have a question. Does in your country introduced truck electricity network on the high road? Because as I know, the USA.
Just a second. Masha, could you help me? Could you hear his question in Russian and translate it for me so I can understand? Figure in Russian. Yeah, don't.
Я попросил начали внедрять сейчас начали внедрять через electricity network system.
Are you already introducing electricity?
And the USA track electricity network.
And you track electricity network?
Yes, we are.
Are you using
We're
that?
testing it. It's happening in buses, and we're looking at buses.
Because as I know, the USA government was wonderful when they saw it in Sweden.
The first thing that's happened with truck vehicles is they're starting to use biodiesel. The diesel ones are trying to use biodiesel, and the gasoline buses are trying to be converted to electric and natural gas. Okay.
Я бы хотел спросить, много ли участков этой дороги?
Он говорит про отдельные автобусы.
Нет, я...
Можно попросить презентацию скинуть?
Куда?